This videotape was edited from a 4-day advanced submodalities training in Boulder, Colorado, late September of 1987. All the participants in this training have completed an NLP practitioner training as well as a 12-day advanced submodalities training. Richard presupposes this background as he goes on to present new material he's developed recently. Since Richard always demonstrates what he's teaching while he's teaching it, as well as incorporates other NLP methods, the videotape offers information at many levels simultaneously. Those without extensive NLP training can enjoy learning the particular method being taught, while someone with more complete background can learn at multiple and deeper levels, particularly with repeated viewing.
Now, there's a little thing that I thought we'd start with this time that it'll be somewhat familiar to those of you that have been in Connie Ray's training. There's a little concept that's always fascinated me I guess it was about 19, forget what year it was, one of those years, 1977, 78, something like that. They was watching television. I was, on the road, and I was sitting there, and they had this little flick on, and they had made this on PBS, and it was about Einstein. It was his 100th birthday, or something like that. And so they made this little flick about it where they had they had two brothers that were identical twins. And one was on Earth, and the other was in a spacecraft. And he was outside a black hole in space, and he was about to go into it. And they were trying to explain the concept of relativity of time. Now, one of the things that's always fascinated me since I very first found out about Milton, and when I first found out about him, I took his book, Advanced Techniques of Hypnosis and Therapy, and all the articles that I could find, and every claim he made about anything he had done with hypnosis, what we did is we recapitulated it. It was that, see, most people would try and disprove a theory. For modelers, we only want to know, how do you do things? When I went down and talked to Milton, one of the primary things that I did was I sat there and I went through the book, because there were some things that he said he did, but he didn't give examples of how he did it. So it wasn't clear to me, for example, one of the things I didn't know was he induced color blindness in someone. And he actually describes, in the book, he describes inducing color blindness covertly. Now, I thought to myself, it's like not very covert to go, you cannot see colors anymore. But to induce trance, and once you had a deep enough trance, you can kind of covertly induce anything. But I wanted to know how he did it. So what I did with Milton is he has a trance chair in his room, the official trance chair, and then two other crotchety folding chairs, so that if you start to move, it goes, so he can get body catalepsy immediately by holding you still. What I did is I'd have him sit there, and if there was other people in the room, I'd have him do it with them. Otherwise, I'd tell him just to hypnotize the chair, because he was always going to hypnotize me anyway. I'd know it, but if he faced the chair and did it, he was much more exaggerated about the parts that were analog marked, because he would have to turn towards me a little bit more. So that way I would know the parts that he was marking out by his tonal shift. So as he went, as he went into his routine about, what is a blue Monday? Blue doesn't mean anything at all. Now, as he began to examine the thing about color blindness and stuff, the one thing is Milton did a whole little separate book on time distortion. And I became fascinated with the things about time, because one of the things was that I decided to sort of take it to the limits. Because as I was going back, and I left Phoenix after I had him do this time distortion thing with somebody there, and I was flying back, I got off, and I lived at the time about an hour and a half from the San Francisco airport. But I landed at night, got in my little Mazda with the rotary engine, the car that goes, let's see. That was a great car to think in, because when you drove in it, it went, ideas kept popping into my mind. That's why we dedicated a book to it. So we would drive down the road, we'd both sit there, and the things would just flash in our minds. But as I was driving down Highway 1, I was just flying. I was, driving what's casual for me, probably about 120 at night, when there's no one around. You're allowed to do that as long as you don't get caught. And then when I came into town, you know, you go by and you stop at the first stoplight, and then you go through a 45-mile-an-hour zone. Now, suddenly here I am driving 45 miles an hour, which is not that slow, but I felt like I wasn't moving at all. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever driven fast off a freeway. You know, it's one thing, 25 miles an hour. I've never even owned a car that will go 25 miles an hour, right? You know, even in first gear, the car is going, we can't go this slow. But even 45 miles an hour is fairly fast. Now, if you drive, you know, through like a 15-mile-an-hour zone, which, you know, that's where you put your car on idle, open the window and go like this, right? And I mean, then when you go 25 miles an hour, you seem like you're going faster. Now, I started to really wonder, what is it that makes an experience fast and slow? See, one of the things that I want to start with this morning is, for those of you who have done NLP techniques and used them, especially those of you who have done it in the context of therapy somehow, but it's true in sales and stuff, when you stop and ask people to pick a memory, have you ever done that, right? You've done this hundreds of times. And I want to show you this little thing that might have slipped through your mind about it, is that people go, yeah, okay, right? And you go, now, I want you to start with the beginning of the slide, right? And no matter what you have them do with it, and then tell them to stop at the end, how do they know where it begins and ends? Isn't that kind of a weird thing if you stop and think about it? Now, for me, that it's like when I'm trying to give you a feel for something that I want you to do, that there's a technique that goes with it. But first, I'm going to have you do your favorite thing of all, elicitation about it. Primarily because there's something about different kinds of things. For example, you've heard people say 1,000 times to you that, you know, where does the time go? The time just whoosh, went away. For example, have you ever heard anybody tell you that it was a fast month? Or have you ever said it? Or, for example, you can go out on a date and the date can fly by, but yet in the middle of the same date, you can be waiting in line at a movie for 5 minutes and have it take forever. But later on, when you're talking about the same date, you say, well, the whole evening just flew by. But yet 5 minutes of it lasted a week. But somehow or other, the way in which you do something that has to do with chunking. Now, there's a very, very powerful use for this, and I'll kind of give you an example. There's a gentleman that I worked with one time who has also made a comment, which I'm sure you've heard lots and lots of times, where he's attempted to use NLP techniques, and especially in his particular case, he got them out of the book, and then he went and worked with one of the highly trained experts from another organization, which shall remain unnamed, which is probably the way they should have left it. But what happened to him is that he used the techniques, but the funny thing about these techniques is that they were designed to do some things and not others. So when you use them for things other than what they were designed for, typically they don't work, or they work kind of. Now, when they work kind of is when you get people that will say things to you about how it worked for a while. Now, this particular man had a thing where he went to work and he sat at his desk, and especially in this context, since he owned the company, it sort of seemed like he should do some of the work when he was there, but he would think about taking a walk, or think about reading a book, think about everything except what it was that he needed to do. And he said that even at operating at 10% of his capacity, he was still making plenty of money. But if he were to operate more, it would even be that much better. Now, he went and first he attempted to use reframing to reframe about his procrastination. And that he tried to reframe things. For example, I asked him what kinds of tasks he had to do, and it has to do with cold calling and filing and different things. And he said, well, you know, that he had used a technique with somebody where they tried to affect and install a motivation strategy which would motivate him to file. And the thing is that when he thought about filing, he felt motivated. But when he was sitting at his desk, he didn't do any. Now, the little quirk in there is that when I asked him, you know, what happened when he was at work in terms of time, I said, it seems like to you that you have nothing but time at work. And he said, well, you know, when I think about filing, I know how to do it. I mean, it's all sitting there on the desk. It's just that I really don't want to. And he said, I know it wouldn't even take me very long. And he said, I think about the number of phone calls I have to make. It wouldn't really take me that long either. And when I think about this other thing, it wouldn't take me this long. Now, if I presuppose to you that one of the things that changes your sensation of time has to do with the fact he didn't think about it as a work day. Now, when he picked something that he was highly motivated to do, where his motivation strategy worked, one of the most primary pieces about how it worked is when he thought about going skiing, he did not think about going down one slope and then going down a straightaway and then making a curve. He didn't even think about it as a single run. He thought about it as 3 days of skiing, which got him all charged up, and it carried through the 3 days. The thing about motivation itself is that the nature of it is something that you either have to motivate yourself to do something small or you have to keep going. Now, if you're going to go to work and have 8 hours and your motivation is attached to the task, what happens is the way in which people codify time and speed seems to be almost as if there's a fixed amount. In other words, there's something that's this big, and this is just a metaphor, but something that's this big. And if you put a whole day in it, a whole bunch of stuff, then it seems to go by quick. And if you don't put much in it, then it goes by slow. And it also affects the way in which you're motivated. You see, if your motivation runs by the day, right, then it's not going to take much effort to get things done. If you have to start a whole motivation over again every time you switch, that means you'll have to become remotivated every time the phone rings. This makes going to work really work. Now, I'll tell you where I want you to start this morning and get somebody who's real good to help you with this, okay? Because this is not the place we normally start. I want to warn you about that. We are not starting at the beginning, but you stick with Charles here. Charles will help you. Charles in charge. It's a nice ring to it. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to have the person go back, and I want you to have them access 3 or 4 different experiences where time just flew by. And I want you, unlike the way you're used to doing things, to just let them talk about each one for a few minutes to describe what it was. Now, what I want you to notate for yourself, more than to ask, I want you to listen to the kind of temporal predicates that they use. If I walk, am I going to get strangled? Okay, good. I'll hold you responsible for that. Oh, look at all this cord. That's nice. Now, the thing is that what you're interested in is words that have to do with time, distance, and what I want you to do is just to begin to notate things that as somebody talks about experiences, like for example, one of the things is when you ask them, I want you to notice what the experience that they pick. It could be something where an hour flew by, because it's a very general question you're asking them. To find out when you ask them, you know, of a time, any situation, and I want you to make sure that you don't predetermine this, that when you ask them, I want you to ask them in such a way that it's left wide open. Because there's a funny thing with time, that when you're very, very young, a month takes forever. I don't know if some of you can remember, when you were a kid, birthdays were far apart. Way far apart. Now, as you get older, they say that time moves faster. But it's not really like that. It does both instead. If you really stop and think about it, birthdays come faster, but they also come slower. You have 2 ways of thinking about it, and they're different. I mean, there are some times where a month takes forever. And then when you sit down to do the bills, it seems like the month went by just like that. doesn't it? But yet, you know, it still is a funny thing that when you're going through, it has to do with something that we'll get to a little later as we get into this. Now, what I want you to do is, as they describe the experience, I want you to begin to notate the following things. When they pick things, to begin with, which chunk of time do they pick? In other words, when they're going to tell you 3 or 4 different things, is one something where it was a 2-hour movie and another was a 2-week vacation? Or do they seem to pick relatively the same chunks? Now, if the chunks themselves are different, which most likely they will be, and your job will be with them will be to use congruency to get them to access fine examples, because when they're sitting here, being able to do transderivational search by time is not familiar. So one of the things you're going to have to do is almost induce a mood in them. In other words, you have to give them some examples. You have to kind of get them almost into the state. And then where you start telling them, so you almost have to start by telling them first about times where things go fast. But you'd want to remain very general so you don't predetermine. Because if you start telling them about things that took an hour, they will start telling you about things that took an hour. So you want to just be very general in your description and tell them to go back and try and remember the feeling of just time just zinging by really quick. And it's almost as if you don't notice it. And as you stop and you go back and you remember what it feels like to just, and this is the place where consciousness steps in, to just notice. Suddenly you look and time has flown by and you go, where has the time gone? And have them then go back and remember examples. Now, once you find the examples, I want you to, given your study of the meta model, add to it especially things like presupposition. Listen for what kind of presupposition. Listen for what kinds of temporal predicates are there. Now, once you've run through the 3, right, not one at a time, but once they've run through and told you about 3, just generally, you don't have to let them go on like it's Gone with the Wind or anything. Then I want you to do is I want you to go back through each of the 3. Now that they've established, they've remembered already, so the memory is now going to be clearer in their mind. Because if you did this initially, you'll distort it. Have them, this is the point, is have them go back and think of the memory, the 3 memories they told you about. Have them do 1, right, and tell them to do it from the beginning to the end, and have them do each of the 3. And I want you to clock it. Okay? Have them run through the memory and clock it. As you go through, then when you go through and you clock it, the next thing I want you to do is to go through, and I want you to examine the submodalities which are similar. Now, of course, we're going to do the same thing here with when time goes slow. See, the thing about time going slow, if you think of the instances where this occurs, if you go to the movies, right, you're standing in line, the task that you're doing in your mind is not that long of a one. See, if waiting in line was part of seeing a whole film, right, time would go faster, except you haven't seen the film yet. So if you stop and think in your own mind, in other words, as you were approaching the line, when your mind, what you know you're going to do is to move from here to here. And you know damn well it doesn't take that long to walk that far, right? And so when you only think about that task, there is nothing for you to do but wait. And as you wait, what happens is that even when you stop, you can stop and talk to somebody if you're with somebody. It's a lot harder to wait when you're not, by the way. It's always a good thing to do if you have to wait in line is bring people with you who are entertaining. Or one of these new hand televisions. You know what I'm waiting? They have a TV on a wristwatch. I'm waiting for the VCR now that goes in your pocket. So I always thought I had this great idea where instead of putting it on a wristwatch, they should give you a pair of goggles that you could put on with a TV on it, and then just one little hole so you could kind of pay attention. You could look outside and see what was going on. So when you waited in line, you could just sort of go into your own little world. Of course, the movie might start and you'd still be outside, but you could watch a movie on your way to the movie then. Now, the thing is that when you have people pick experiences where time moves slowly, again, you're going to be looking for the same things. But I first, unlike the way you do normal elicitation with submodalities, the way I want you to do it is first I want you to have them tell you the 3 memories, then I want you to clock 3 memories, and then I want you to run through submodalities. Now, in order to sort of run through that, you're going to have to do a comparison. But I still want you to do these as if they're separate tasks, because we're trying to find out something unique. And the unique characteristic you're looking for here has to do with, as you elicit the submodalities of when time is moving fast, I want you to take and compare the 3 experiences with each other. Because all you're looking for is, if there are any differences between the 3, those are the things that don't matter. Because the one thing the 3 experiences have in common is that time is moving lightning fast. And the thing is I also want you to pay particular attention to the kinesthetic sensations as well. When I'm going to propose to you that what you're doing here, in terms of a technique, has a very universal quality to it, because there's a phenomenon which occurs at 2 levels. The thing is that, have you ever noticed when you're having a problem or anything that's a difficulty and bothers you, or if for those of you who do therapy of one form or another, that even when the client sessions where you have a depressive take forever? Ever notice that? See, depression is not where time flies by at all. Not even for the people around depressives. That, it's like one of the things that when I had depressives come in, the first thing I'd always do is catch them off guard, tell them a joke, get them laughing, just keep them rocking and rolling. And I started doing that primarily because if I didn't catch them right off the get, when they started in, I had to listen to the whole diatribe, right, about all the depressing things that had happened. Now, this is how I found out, by the way, for those of you that know my thing on depression, how I found out that depressives looked back, because then they came in the next week and they'd go, well, everything is just da-da-da-da. And I'd go, well, wait a minute, you sat in here and yucked it up for an hour last week. And they'd go, well, at the time I thought I was having fun. But not really. When I think about it now, the thing is that they have a way of coding things so that when they look back, even at pleasant experiences, they become depressing. See, it's not that depressives don't enjoy themselves. It's that when they remember things, it's depressing. They have a way of, so to speak, coloring everything. Now, the thing about making life more vivacious and more fun and being able to control all kinds of things, there are things where, see, when people's thoughts move really fast, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're having fun. But time will move quickly. For example, psychotics episodes don't seem to take that long at all. You'd think that, given the nature of how unpleasant they are, that for a psychotic, that, a wild psychotic episode, that went on for a day would be excruciating. I mean, I had one guy that, that he would just sort of black out and he felt like he was being whipped with barbed wire, And, this would go on for, sometimes for a whole day. And, and he was a really straight guy, too. It was really a weird thing, because he was a straight guy, suit and tie, had a normal job, and then just suddenly he would just freak out, be at work, and rolling around on the floor and screaming and all of this stuff. And one of the things I asked him is, I said, because, I can't imagine anybody being tortured for that long, because he'd be really exhausted at the end. And he said, well, I'm always surprised at how much time has gone by. Because, it feels like, it's like an hour and I'll be missing a whole day. Now, they always say, my, how time flies when you're having fun. But the thing is that it flies even when you're not having fun sometimes. How many of you have ever gone and seen a really fast-moving horror movie? Right? Just scared the pants off of you? That didn't take a long time, did it? By the way, you'll all be happy to know I'm now designing a horror movie. I just for you, that movie producer that decided that the best use of NLP in film would be to scare the crap out of people, putting them inside the horror movie rather than identifying it with it. You know, the thing is you can watch somebody being afraid on a roller coaster. You can be in the front seat. They do that in films a lot. That I know Stephen King loves to put you right inside of the negative characters so that you can watch the other person running away. He loves thin, long corridors. There's somebody running down it and you're chasing them. Well, you can get nastier than that. You could get inside their mind entirely. Wouldn't it be interesting to be having the thoughts rather than hearing about the thoughts that Jack Nicholson was having in his mind in films like The Shining, which I found to be somewhat boring. It took a long time to watch that movie to me, but whatever was going on in his head must have been a lot more fun, being the character itself that was planning all of these things. To be able to be in the mood to put an axe through the door and go, "Here's Johnny." He must have been having some fun now. Now, what it is that I'm having you look for in a person is a control variable in terms of time. Milton did some wild shit with this stuff in trance. For example, what I refer to as the Milton diet, is that Milton put this woman in a trance, taught her to do time distortion, by the way, which is one of the things that we're going to work with this weekend. What he did is he made it so that when it was time to eat, that when she touched a piece of silverware, what would happen is she would drop into an altered state, and it would take an hour for the spoon to get to her mouth. Now, what this did is it made eating really boring. So somebody whose main passion in life was to overeat became somebody that was going to have to be there for a week to eat a bowl of soup. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as the best diet there is, but given the time that Milton did this, I think this is an intensely creative move. And you begin to understand the variables. You can begin to understand that there's also a relationship between the kind of performance you have in certain situations. For example, a baseball player, okay, they use a term in baseball called, "I was really seeing the ball that day." Now that's the description of when they're batting well, when they're being able to play on the field well. To them, everything centers around the speed of the ball. Now, as you begin to understand this, I also want you to understand that the control variables about changing things, there's more than one way to approach changing anything. For example, if you could change the subjective experience of time of the psychotic that I was talking about, he wouldn't have the psychotic episode. If time wasn't moving that fast, if it went into slow motion, it would no longer be a psychotic episode. That one of the things that if you just, well, I want you to just stop and think about it just real practically, right? If we can change the submodalities of a memory, right, and it changes the way we feel about it. Most of you know that, right? If you push it away, it seems like it's from longer ago and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you change the speed of images themselves, that's a submodality. But there's a more sort of basic thing in that. How many of you have a good clock inside you? For example, you can set it to wake up. How many of you can set your clock to wake you up in the morning? You don't need an alarm clock. Look at how many people that is. Now, the rest of you have as good a clock, by the way. You just haven't learned to set it. It's really the only difference. Which means that your body actually knows how much time goes by. But it also, there's a mechanism by which you still, so the same people, you guys can set your clock so you have an absolute good sense of time, right? You can make it so that it'll wake you up at exactly 8, right? So you go to bed at 10, wakes you up at 8. But yet time still goes fast and slow for you too, doesn't it? Which means your body can control these mechanisms, but by the same token, it can also lie to you, which is a good thing, because you can make things more fun, because some things you need to experience time subjectively. Now, when Milton did time distortion with people, and this is what I'm going to suggest to you as part of what comes out of this, People were able to do absolutely phenomenal things. And when he would do it, one of the main structures he would use, and I mean, these were all people that were just super deep trance subjects. But you have to understand, most people do not realize, most of what has come out of NLP started by my going, why does somebody have to go into a trance? I mean, I was really sitting there one night, we were doing all this hypnosis with people, and they were going in doing all this fucking wild shit we were having them do. And I looked up and I said, why the fuck do they have to go into a trance to do this? It's still their brain doing it. Doesn't make any sense to me. So I brought this guy, I said, you, come here. I said, sit down. I said, I don't want you to go into a trance, okay? I mean, you know, as much as that's possible. The guy went, right. I said, it's not exactly what I'd call a double-blind control, but I told him to look at a lamp, and I said, disappear it. Right? And the guy went, what? And I said, without going? I said, no. I said, just stay in the waking state. Slapped him once or twice. I said, do you feel awake? Yeah, I feel awake. I said, look at the lamp. Now make it in, just disappear the lamp. You know, and he, of course, I love people. They're always so casual. He goes, do you want me to do the end table it's on or just the lamp? People never cease to amaze me. I go, no, just the lamp. Oh, okay. And he looks at it, and I said, has it disappeared? And he went, well, no. And I said, has it disappeared at all? And he went, well, a little bit. And I thought to myself, I said, well, what stops you from being able to just disappear it? I said, you did it when you were in a trance. And he said, I don't know. That is, I do the activity of not knowing how I did it. Which makes sense, because if you went around disappearing things randomly, you'd bump into them. So I figured there had to be some kind of a mechanism there that made sense, but still it didn't make sense in a trance. Because, see, negative hallucination has some real advantages, you know. I mean, I know somebody's really bothering me in a seminar, I just negatively hallucinate them. They're not there. They don't bother me anymore. I've since learned to do a lot of things like that. Of course, sometimes I forget that I negatively hallucinated them, and creates a little bit of trouble sometimes. You know, for example, I set things on them. You know, there'll be an empty chair sitting in the front row, and I'll walk up and set my coffee on it. You know, I hear a little scream out of the void, and I go, uh-oh. For example, Robert Dill, I'll tell you, for those of you, I love Robert Dill. He's one of my favorite people. I co-taught a hypnosis seminar with him once, and we brought up a demonstration subject and put him into a trance, and did a thing that Robert loves deep trance phenomenon. It's like a toy to him. And I gave all the suggestions that in a few moments that this lady would be absolutely alone with Robert, right? Wouldn't see anybody. And Robert gave the suggestions himself and said he wouldn't be able to see anyone else in the room other than him. But he forgot to say hear as well anyone else. So when he brought this lady into the stage, she was sitting there, she couldn't see anyone else in the room. And he had sort of age regressed her as well, and he went, hi. And she went, hi, how are you? And he went, are we alone? And she went, oh yes, we're alone. Everybody in the room burst out laughing, and she went. He got terrified because there was 150 people, you know. Sort of reminds me of a Star Trek episode. Now, what I want you to do as you do this is to pay particular attention to these devices on the side of your head, okay? Because as you're going through, this isn't like just eliciting submodalities, okay? It's not what we're after. I want you to really sensitize yourself to the parts of language that have to do with time. Listen to them. Write down key phrases that you hear. Things that when you hear the phrase, something inside you goes zzz. It affects you somehow. That it has something to do with what I've been alluding to. Then when you do go through and do the submodalities, remember, what you're looking for is to find out not so much the submodalities that you're used to. It's not going to be the kind of submodalities that are important. It's not going to be location that makes a difference. Because what we're going to be after is affecting not your sense of time about a memory, but your sense of time about experience itself. If you can put the world into slow motion, I mean, think of, to begin with, just from a monetary point of view, if you can learn to control this enough, imagine what it would be worth to a baseball player to have the ball move like this. Now, the difficulty is, see, like you can take somebody and hypnotize them, put them in that state, right? but then they may forget to run to the base. You know, it's a real difference to being able to actually crank yourself up into that state. I know that athletes in many things go through little rituals where they crank themselves up. For example, there are some things that you want to be where you want things to time to be able to go by very quickly. See, for example, if depression goes by quickly, it's not depression. There are all kinds of things. For example, and it doesn't have to do with whether pleasant or not. I mean, you could take a test and it can last forever, or it can go by like that, and it will affect how well you do. The faster you unload data, the quicker a test goes by, and usually the more accurate it is. Now, it also has something to do with, for example, for those of you who do NLP, if you do full-blown strategy elicitation and overlay it with a cross-section with strategies and with submodalities, and really do the full-blown elicitation, most people don't like to do that because it takes forever. But you can change that now. This is what I'm alluding to. So what I want you to do is get yourself a partner. I want you to sit down. We want the key phrases, and then at the end, one. But remember to clock it. When you do the clocking it part, or you have them stop and remember it, have them go through each of the three memories, clock them, and then go back and elicit the submodalities. Now, I suggest, just for the hell of it, okay, you start with the kinesthetic, and then do the auditory, and then the visual. It's because I found that people, when they do elicitation, the submodalities seem to have to start with the visual, because most people have that first on their list. And for some reason, that means that you must always do it that way. And for a lot of things, it's easier to start with the visual. For this, it will be the least of all the useful elements. Okay? Now, I want you to go ahead and get started on this. We'll come around and check on you. Now. I walked around to some of the groups and listened to you. You're doing real good. And I was actually kind of pleased. Somebody told me they were having trouble doing something. I explained how to do it and then told them I'd do it for them, and they told me no. Show always tell, which tells me this really is an advanced group. That's different than the people, well, can we watch you do it? And I go, well, it's not visual. I'm going to be asking questions, you know, and they go, well, if we could just see it one time, you know, then, you know, but I know through the years when I've done these demonstrations for people, for some reason they're unable to pick up all the things that I do. I always love it in intros when people go, if we watch you do it, then we'll know what you're doing. Right. I'm sure they can pick up what I'm doing their first time out. See, it's a lot easier for people once they've done something, and then if it's described to them, then when they go back again, they'll know much more about it. Without some experience themselves, I've always found that for people to watch something, it kind of goes by too fast for them, so to speak. Now, I wanted to go back to the phenomenon of the depressive, because it's not that we're after working for a cure for depression. Actually, psychiatrists have come up with a good mechanism for that. They drug them. And I can imagine if you took a depressive, if you actually could find a drug that interrupted your memory enough, and I know of some of those because I've had some in my life, that if you interrupted their memory enough so that they weren't able to remember well, they wouldn't be able to be depressives. See, in order to be a depressive, it requires that you're able to think back on experiences and turn them into something that even if they were having fun at the time, when they think about it, they think, well, I wasn't really having fun. Now, for us here, how many of you found some of the common patterns, which are, for example, that some of the experiences that when you were in them were slow, when after they were over, when you thought about them, they were fast. In other words, some of the things that you think about, at the time that you're in, when you were there, it was very, very slow. But when you think about it afterwards, they go by very quickly. Okay, now, this is one of the universals that you find in this. Now, wouldn't it be nice to be able to know the difference between these things? Because if you stop and think about it, there are some experiences that when you're having them, time, for example, what was the difference in the time disparity between long and short ones? Give me some examples.
10 seconds difference between one to the other.
10 seconds.
A minute.
You had
5 seconds.
What?
30 seconds.
30 seconds? Okay. Much.
Mine were all
took longer to tell about the fast ones than the slow ones.
No, it's not how, you weren't supposed to clock how long it took to tell about it, how long it took for you to think through it on the inside. If you clock how long it takes people to talk about things, you know, you're going to need a calendar, not a watch. See these little holes here on the side? Right? I like to remind you what those are for. It's like, you know, the old thing about turning things on from elementary school. It was to clock the memory, not their ability to espouse about it.
30 to 40 seconds.
Okay.
The shorter one being shorter.
Was the shorter one shorter? Did anybody find the longer one short? What?
The faster one shorter and the longer with the...
Longer one longer. Well, at least that's nice. But the difference in time was only a matter of a few seconds, really, for the most part. But see, inside your mind, 10 seconds can take forever. You know, if you have the right kind of watch, right? There's some watches. If you have the right kind of watch and you look at it and count 10 seconds, 10 seconds can take forever. Whereas with other watches, you can't discern how long 10 seconds is. For example, the ones that go by that have the whole minute. See, there are ones that sweep this way, and then there are ones like that somebody here had a watch that measured the hundredths of the seconds, right? That makes the individual seconds take longer. When you have that, when you can watch the hundredths of the second go by, let's go all the way up to 100, boom, one, then all the way into it. Now, there's another pattern which you may have noticed, which is when things are taking a long time, what you'll notice is that people break it down into more pieces. For example, waiting in line, people spend a lot of time shuttling between the inside and the outside, such that they are checking, and they check time more often, because what they're doing is breaking up activity into more pieces. But let us consider, for example, the usefulness of what we're talking about. Now, if you think of an experience, for example, let's take sex, for example. Now, if you were somebody that took time, okay, you took the strategy of when you were in an experience, it seemed like it was taking a long time. But when it was over, it seemed like it just went by that quick. You could end up being a fairly unsatisfied person, because it wouldn't matter how long it really went on. When it was over, it would seem like it just buzzed right by. Now, there's also a difference between whether or not the length of time subjectively, whether it's a long time or a short time, whether or not that's satisfying as well. Now, the example I like to use in this is that when I hypnotized a baseball player, okay, when he was actually playing the game in a state of time distortion, the ball moved this fast, which actually was a little too slow, because he became impatient. You know, as it would leave the pitcher's hand, he would see what kind of pitch it was, and it would have too much time for him to really keep his body stressed and poised. He could hit it every time. Even though the pitches were going 130 miles an hour, they looked like the thing looked like it was moving like this. He could always hit it, but he couldn't really get the feeling that goes along with the ball moving fast. It was like hitting a ball that was sitting on a stick. That's what he said. The time it got there, you know, he almost lost interest in swinging at it. He wanted to run halfway out between the plate and the ball and take a swing at the thing. And when the throw would go from third base to first base, because I made it whenever the ball was in motion, it would go slow. And I mean, it would take forever to get across, which would give him plenty of time, you know, if it was coming to him to run over there and catch it. But it was like, you know, as he would run over to the plate, you know, he would see the ball moving. He would run over, and it was like, da 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 da, and he would see the other player running very slowly up towards the plate. He'd have plenty of time to get his hand up, but he'd hold his hand up, and the amount of time it would take to go there would seem like, as he put it, an eternity. Right? He said he knew he was going to catch it, but it was almost like he couldn't hold his arm up that long. His arm would get tired. Now, the thing is, the weird thing for him was that after the game was over, when he thought about the game seemed to go like this. Now, that is because when he thinks about a regular baseball game, there's X amount of activity. When he thought about this particular game, the thing is there was so many breaks back and forth that when he thought about it as a single unit, his memory, in order to have his memory in the same amount of time, went by very fast. Now, the reason I had you clock the things that you did is what I want you to do is to go back now, and what we're going to do is we're going to take certain kinds of I'll strangle myself here again. We're going to take some experiences. For example, I want you to take something, an experience, where what somebody was doing, okay, was an activity, because what we're dealing with here a lot is activities. For example, what I want you to take is to go back and to think about something that is very, that took a long time and you want it to. Okay, there's some differences. There's a long time and you want it to be that way. There's a long time and you don't want it to be that way. See, there's some things when you think back on, you'd like them to be fast, right? For example, think of driving. I know people, for those of you who live here in Boulder, you think Denver is a foreign country. That when you live in a small town, and this happens everywhere, when you live in a small town, like driving to the store is a big deal. Man, you live in L.A., you know, when you think about driving an hour and a half. See, people in L.A. will drive to San Francisco a lot more than people in a little town like Santa Cruz will ever drive to L.A. See, people who drive distances, their sense of distance is different. For them to consider a 9-hour trip, right? Now, when you stop and you think about something, and you think about the amount of time that you're going to be involved in it, the thing is there are some things that you know where time goes fast. So when you think of doing them, what goes on in your mind is like if somebody asks you to engage in an activity and you know that it's not going to take long. Now, whether it really takes long or not, because the thing is like you can ask some people, hey, you want to go out and play golf on Saturday? And I mean, golf to me is like one of the most excruciating sports there is, you know. I mean, they give you a perfectly good cart to drive the ball down there and drop it in the hole. I see no reason why I have to walk all that way, you know. And I mean, and plus, these guys, when they get up there, when you're waiting for the other guy to take his turn, I always want to go up and smack them, because they get up there and they get this thing and they go like this. And then they do this and they go like this, you know, and I'm going, well, you just hit the fucking ball, will you? Let's get on with this. Yeah. But when you ask those people, you go, would you like to go play golf? You know, I said, you know, do you have time? They go, oh, yeah, we'll play a quick game, 9 holes. I mean, you know, I don't know how they ever make it through 18. I'm lucky if I can make it through 3. Now, the thing is for when it has to do with the way that you consider the task itself. There are some people that, I mean, and it changes in your lifetime too, because I know when I was a musician, I used to drive everywhere. I mean, you know, I was the guy that drove the thing with all the equipment in it. And it was nothing to me to bop in it and go to L.A. And I mean, you know, people would say things like, what do you want to do this weekend? You know, and we'd drive to New York and back. I mean, we used to do that. We used to get, of course, we'd drive, take turns. We'd just drive straight ahead and go to New York, you know, and spend a few days in New York and drive back. There's nothing to do that. Now, when I stop now and I think about driving from San Francisco to New York, it's like inconceivable to me. Now, the thing is about time, what I want you to do is to go, and I want you to get the sequential strategy of the programming, and we'll call time 1 the programming state. In other words, if you're capable of programming yourself to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning, right, that's a pretty trippy thing, because you even sleep in the middle and remember to do it. I mean, it shows you how much this unconsciously affects you. When you think back on playing a game, see, it amazes me that baseball players can go into slumps and go out and have horrible experiences for 5 games straight and want to go out again. I mean, because, I mean, they suffer, so you watch them walk in. When they lose, they just, you know, have a bad day, especially, there's always one where it's more their fault than the others, the one that made the mistakes. But when you ask them to think about the game of baseball, they don't think about it they don't think about the last thing they did. They think about the highs. They can always code it. I go, well, you know, I said, how could you like playing baseball, you know, given what happened the other day? And they go, oh, well, you know, I was just having a down day, but I love to play the game. And I was playing the game, even if I was playing badly. They managed to recode the past in the inverse fashion of the depressive. Now, there are some people who are generally happier than others. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they can code when they go back and make things pleasant. You know, they got the same thing they've got the same thing the depressive has. They just picked a better way to do it. Say, I mean, if you can look back and at most experiences and recode them into something pleasant, even if they weren't. Now, I know this because I have vacationed with people like this. And they actually want to go back to the same horrible place we went before. I don't know if you know anyone like this or if it rings any bells, but I went on a forced march through Europe one time, in which I brought back as souvenirs sore feet, worn out shoes, and a real bad attitude about Europe, because I saw all the old buildings I will ever want to see in my lifetime and ate all the worst food I can imagine. They always told me the food was great in Europe and all kinds of stuff, but I forgot who I was talking to. I mean, the thing is before I listen to anybody tell me about good food, I'm going to serve them 2 meals, and if they can tell me which one's the good one, then I will listen to their advice. Because this forced march I went on through, I mean, it was hideous, right? Person who went with me, right, we weren't even back 2 months, and they're reminiscing about it like we had a good time. And I mean, we had everything go wrong you could imagine, you know. I mean, nothing else could have gone wrong other than a plane crash. I mean, you know, everything from, you know, getting a rental car and having it break down 20 miles outside of the first town, right? No spare tire, no tools, I mean, just everything, like, you know. I mean, I really want to fly to a foreign country and work on a car. That's my idea of a party, you know. But when this person stopped back, they had, quote unquote, romanticized the whole thing. I mean, my memories of Europe, in order to make them pleasant, I got to make jokes out of them. I got to look back and laugh. This person looks back with fond memories. Now, the only bad part about it is they wanted to go back. And I said, adios, I'll drive you to the plane. In fact, I'll find another romantic to go with you. Somebody else who went there and had a horrible time. You can go and have horrible times together, and then you can sit down and enjoy talking about them. Because when they talk to me about it, I go, oh, yeah, you're big fun, man. I said, you know what? Why don't we just go out this evening on a date? I tell you what we'll do. We'll go out, we'll drive outside of town. I'll take the carburetor off of your car, flatten the tire, and leave you there. Sound like fun? And they'll always say to you, they go, well, it could be. It depends upon who you're with. Now, it's a good attitude to have. I mean, you know, a little realism might help, but now and then. But the kind of thing is that if you can stop and get a sequential strategy. Now, you know about this. You know what submodality strategies are, right? Okay, all except for you. Okay, and you now have a hint about what they are. Okay. Now, you remember the sequential strategies? You remember the strategies that hurt to elicit? Where you elicit somebody's motivation strategy, where you keep track, you know, the stuff about totes? Now it's time to learn them again. Because what you want to do is you want to be able now to examine, since what we're dealing with here is things that really influence behavior. The thing about time is it really has a lot to do with not only how you experience with what you do, but what you will do. You see, the thing about being able to drive on a long drive. See, I've been flying so much the past 17 years. After I gave up being a musician, I virtually gave up driving. The only drive that I ever make is to the airport. And every time I drive it, it gets longer. You know, I tried taking new roads, but there's only so many roads you can take. And then, you know, I tried switching back and forth between them to get them to go faster. I've tried all kinds of things, and I finally had to come up with a mechanism that made it so it was the same amount of time as driving to the store. And there's no reason why you can't control these mechanisms if you understand that what you do is... You remember last time we were here, we did the thing about post-hypnotic suggestion strategy? Remember, those of you who were here last time? Okay, now, the important part of it is that what we did is we went through, and we went back to the notion of the tote. And what we did is there has to be a test that tells you when to begin this. So somebody says, well, you got to drive this package to LA. Right? Now, immediately you can go into an operation which goes, oh, fuck, man, that's 9 hours, man, of just down the road. You know, program, you can tell yourself things like, oh, I'm going to be bored out of my mind. You'll give yourself all kinds of good suggestions like that. Now, but the same thing is there'll be some place, like, there'll be a drive which not necessarily is much different. I mean, or something that takes a certain amount of time. For example, it's very fascinating to me on planes that for some people, flying goes by quickly, and for some it takes forever. Now, for me, I don't even notice most of it. My trip here to Denver, I did not even know the plane was delayed an hour and a half on the runway, because when I sit down, I go unconscious. And the plane came in an hour and a half late. When we were driving out of the airport, I asked what time it was, and here I find out, that I'm an hour and a half later than I'm supposed to be. I found out the plane was delayed, and we sat out on the runway. I was the only one that didn't know. Now, one thing about being unconscious is it makes time go very quick. It does. Now, if you really go unconscious, you don't know how long you've slept. It's different. For those of you who have good clocks inside you, have you ever been so tired that you just went unconscious and then you didn't wake up? I mean, some people find, if you get totally exhausted, that little alarm clock won't work. And it's almost like just before you go to sleep that this is going to happen. Now, the sequential representation about time, the thing is that there are some things that when you look forward to do them, it's that hours-wise, it's not that the activity itself. See, if somebody lives here in town, thinks about driving, okay, this is the kind of funny stuff that comes on. Thinks about driving to Denver to go have dinner, 35-minute trip. They'll go, oh God, it's just too far. Whereas they'll load up their damn skis and drive up in the middle of fucking nowhere. That's 3.5, 4, or 5 hour drive. And when they try to get me to go with them, they go, oh, it doesn't take that long. It flies right by. Because they're looking forward to a ski trip. It's a larger activity. And there's a real different chunking. Now, the thing is that we want time one. Time one is when they plan the difference between these two. In other words, when you program yourself for whatever it is. The way in which you think about loading up the car, getting the people in it, driving up to one of these, to Vail or one of these places up there so you can break your legs. People always telling me you can't get hurt skiing if you know what you're doing. But all the ski instructors I know have always broken their legs, so I don't trust that. So I think you can get hurt doing anything if you do it, whether you do it well or not, because you have the things called bad days. And if you can't tell them apart, if you knew when you were having bad days, then you'll know what to do. For example, traffic accidents are a fascinating thing where time alters. How many of you have had a near miss in a car? And what happened is suddenly you went into a state of slow motion, and it gave you the chance to be able to deal with it. Well, how many of you can realize that the same state of slow motion may be how you're driving to Denver to have dinner? Well, that's part of what's going on, is that the pre-programming that you do. Now, so you don't get much, when you don't get a chance to plan for an accident, what happens is that slow motion state has something to do with being surprised. That's also why it seems like it goes by very quickly in those situations. It's also a thing where when you plan to go have dinner in Denver, if it seems like a long ride to you, I know people who live in Santa Cruz, the longer they live there, the more sedentary they get about driving. When Chris first moved from L.A. to Santa Cruz, for her to drive to San Francisco or San Jose was nothing. What happened with Chris is that the longer she lived in a little town where nobody ever drives anything, suddenly everything seemed further away, to the point where it was, for a while there, we couldn't even get her to drive to the store. That, it was like the supermarket was like 5 or 10 minutes away. You had to walk all the way down the stairs and get in your car, start it up, drive all the way over there. Now, there are times where things seem fast and slow. If you pick something that you don't want to do, right, and when you think about it, now, the thing is that when you plan these things out, there has to be a test, an operation, a test to know when you're done. Now, sometimes these are internal and external tests. And what you'll discover is that when the test says no, you loop back into the operation. The second step has to do with when you're doing it. Now, if you take something like waiting in line, right, one of the things is that people run an operation over and over and over again. Watching a kettle boil, right? That thing about a watched pot never boils. Well, it does boil eventually. But even when it starts to boil, you can count the bubbles. And in fact, people do. that by cycling through the operation into the second test of the toad over and over and over again, what happens, when they made teapots whistle, they relieved you of this responsibility. They allowed you to go sit down in the other room. It doesn't take so long that way. That's what people who buy those things are after. Whereas when you just put, see, but now with the advent of microwaves, we've solved this problem. Because you can, how many of you have bought a microwave oven? You want to learn about time? Look, can you remember when you used to cook dinner, it took 45 minutes, right? And now you stick in one of these things that has to cook for 7 minutes, and you go out of your mind waiting. Now, what I want you to do is to go through, the first piece you're going to want is the pre-programming state. In other words, when there's an activity where people pre-program themselves, that is, they look ahead to an experience that's going to go quickly or slowly, based on if they're wanting to do it or not. Because you see, part of what we're after is making the change with the executive. Okay, so the executive that goes into his office and don't get nothing done, okay, does not program himself to go into his day so that it is chunked as a single unit. Now, for him, what happened is that the way in which he was motivating himself to go to work made it so that he was not motivated to do the work because the motivation itself did not sustain throughout the day. Now, what you're after here is the actual sequential thing. You want to know what triggers it off in their mind. So somebody says to them something that's auditory external. Then they go into an operation by which they plan. Now, there's one set of operations that your partner will have that makes it so that things are going to look like they're going to go quick. And there are ones that make it look like it's going to go slow. When people think about going on a vacation, this is part of how it works. When people think about going on a vacation, now they may go, now some may do it off of memory, they may go back to another vacation, but they'll run through the whole thing, the driving up, the skiing, and they may do it now. Some people actually run through the whole thing. They go into a state of time distortion and they run the whole 3 days. There are some people that instead of going through time, they go between time. That is, they'll jump from little pieces to little pieces. Now, there are some people that will do a fragment. One fragment that's good enough to get them to do the other things. They simply won't think about driving. But if somebody else were sitting there and says, well, we have to drive all the way up there, when they stop, they'll just pick one fragment of the driving that was a pleasant part, that seemed like it went by fast. Or they'll just think about after the drive when they got there. Because after you've driven 5 hours, you might think back. And even though it was torture the whole time, you might think back and it doesn't seem like it was that long afterwards. It's kind of what you were talking about, you remember? Now, what we're after is the exact strategy. There's a strategy that predicts it, okay? And then the second timepiece is the strategy which is when you're doing it. Okay, there's some things that make things look like they're going to go fast when you want to do them. There are some things that do go fast when you're doing them. And then the third piece has to do with how you look back. Okay, each of these three, which will be similar, okay, you want a piece where you want and time goes fast and where you don't want and time goes slow. And you want to go through and compare the differences in those strategies. These are the long strategies, the ones that go sequential. Now, you don't have to be overly explicit about this. You just want to know how to program yourself, what's going on when it's happening, and how you look back at it. So you can look back as things occurring quick. You can do it with vacations. You can do it. Some of you have had clients that you look forward to. The sessions go quick. When you look back, they seem like they were fast and fun. And by the same token, in the same office, in the same length of time, you have clients that come in that seem like it's watching Gone with the Wind in Chinese. You know, I've had clients that came in and they were only there for 30 minutes and it was the longest year of my life. I don't know if any of you have seen this person, but I think that I had one that came in that actually, I had received tapes of this client from 4 different therapists that had seen them. And I turned on the tapes, and each of the tapes was the same. No, it's 4 different therapists. The first 20 minutes was this long diatribe by this person. When I came in, I knew I had to interrupt it, fought tooth and nail, but the person had to tell me the story. Even when I yelled, shut up, They kept talking. Talking about somebody with no auditory or visual external. But these darn schizos are like that. And this particular schizophrenic, this was one I actually came to like after a while. After I got to meet their hallucinations personally, I discovered that was the best part of them. They had auditory external voice that said all these things and scared her, but it turned out it had a real sense of humor. After I spoke with it privately, it was scaring her for fun. It was bored, didn't know what to do. Now, I want you to go ahead. What time is it anyway? 12:30? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and spend the next half an hour and go through, and some of you make sure that at least one person in your partner knows how to do strategy elicitation, because I know maybe some of you didn't get it. How many people here have done strategies? I know you've done it. Don't lie to me. I can remember you doing it. Yes, but it will all come back to you. You remember, you just start at the beginning and go to the end. Be a piece of cake, trust me. Okay, go ahead and get started on this. Now, okay, the next piece, if you haven't quite finished up, you can go back and finish up, but the next piece is now to begin to take this stuff and to put it into action. I realized it was a lot of elicitation to start with, but I wanted you to have familiarity with, number one, how to ask questions about this stuff. It's like everything else, there aren't that many forms of it. When you learn about buying strategies, when you study and remember strategies, one of the things that you find is there really aren't that many. And then that typically they get down to the point where there's a test and operation, and then the second test is typically a submodality. That, like with buying strategies, very often people will run through a thing and they move the picture closer and they run it, they move it closer. When it gets to a certain point, then they have to have it. There's a certain distance and a certain location. I love to sell things to the people who have it by location, because when you ask them, you know, was there something that you saw, you looked at, and you knew it was the right thing and you had to buy it? And they go, yeah. And there are things you're undecided about, and they go, yeah, like this. And then what I do is I take my brochure and I put it over here, hold it up, and I go, how do you feel about this? They go, oh, I have to have it. What is it? It's a good one. Try it. You know, it's too bad you can't do it over the phone. You know, it's really, telephone sales would be so much easier. You know, if you could say, now take the brochure and move it over to the left. You know, okay, if you got it there, now decide. Wow.
I don't know why you couldn't do that.
Oh, I was just a thought that crossed my mind. I just thought you couldn't. I would not suggest that to anyone. It's the term quotes. Ring a bell? For example. I had a patient once in 1922. Came to me in a seminar, sat right where you are, right there. And she looked and said to me, yeah, why can't you do this? And I said, I don't know why. But as you do, you'll find yourself having immense curiosity about just exactly where you start. Now, what I want you to do is to pick something where time goes slow and you don't want it to. You'd rather time went whoosh and whizzed by and felt good, because you have just now elicited something by which you start out, and the time one is when you program yourself, right? It's the one where you do the setup. It's like a post-hypnotic suggestion. Now, time two is where it actually occurs. Time three, which is for us one of the most critical parts, is sort of like a condenser. But what it is it's where you look back on time and change it. Now, what I want you to do is very simply take the thing, which is, and I use this as a metaphor, I know some of you did it deliberately, which is like pulling teeth. It takes forever. Something like the commute, something where if it went faster, it would be more fun. See, a lot of people at their job, which is where all of this really started, had to do with me working on a modeling job about trying to increase the productivity of an assembly line. And part of the problem is that the actual productivity of the workers diminished over time, whereas you would think it would become so mechanical the line would go faster. What happened is people so dreaded going to their job because the day took forever, because the faster they worked, the more they bracketed time. So if they did 3,000 things in a day, unlike if you work in a restaurant when you're busy, you keep busy and time goes faster, what was happening was that it became so automated for them that their mind, their consciousness was free, and it had nothing to do. Now, we were trying to decide whether to get them all hooked on soap operas and have a big TV, right? But we were afraid they would lose their fingers. Given the nature of the assembly line, it was a little bit dangerous to do so. They were operating devices that could hurt you badly. Now, what we wanted to do is to find a way of making it so that these people, including the commute to work, would make it so that time flew by. Now, what I want you to do is to start with number 3, okay? Now, before you do it, I want you to do the thing. You guys know enough about timelines that if I ask you this, and I'll just run through the identify timeline with you, just for the sake of expedience and review. What I want you to do is to pick an experience from when you were like 5 years old in your mind, and I want you to notice from which direction the pictures come. In other words, when you think of a memory from when you're 5, where do the pictures come from? As well as where do they end up? Now, take something from when you were 18. And then 25. And for some of you, we'll have to stop there. But for those of you, again, like, you know, then another 5 years after that, another 5 years after that. And then what I want you to do is think about it this way. Now, if I were to ask you, Charles, like, where do the ones when you're 5 come from? Point in front of you. Okay. How? Out here?
No, about there. Yeah.
Right about there. Okay. And how about when you were about 15?
Here.
Right there. Okay. How about something from 5 years ago? Where's that?
What's 5 years ago?
2 years ago, Charles.
About there.
About there. So it kind of has a line that goes like this.
Yeah, comes up.
So it kind of goes like this. Yours is bent. You got a bent timeline, right? Time warped. Kind of goes vroom and up there, huh? So you're in the present. You kind of spit it out and throw it to the side, kind of like that. Sort of follows that hand when you knock pictures out. That's where they end up. Each year you knock them out a little bit less far. Okay, now the trick is that now what I want you to do is to pick the thing where you want time to speed up. Something that you'd like to just be fun and get it over with. I mean, for some people, going and working on an assembly line was not like, you know, when they looked forward to it, the magic word being look forward, what they saw was it was going to be another boring week. When they'd think about, they'd go, oh God, another 5 days of work. That's what made Mondays so difficult, is that they looked at it as a whole week. Now, if they think about going to work for 1 day, okay, the thing that I want you to do is to recode time. And the way I want you to do it is instead of starting with step number 1 from the last exercise, I want you to start with number 3. And that's where they look back. What I want you to do is to take the way in which they think and recode time when they look back at it that moves slow. Okay, when they think about whatever it is that goes slow, when they think about it, okay, they're going to think about it as having occurred slowly. I want you to take the example of where they think back and it went like that and it was easy and enjoyable, and I want you to recode it into that strategy. Okay, once you've done that, then the next thing I want you to do is to build 3 past experiences. And I want you to take the timeline itself, have them point, and literally point on the timeline. Say, I want you to now go back and put 3 past experiences so that they can think back to them and build 3 experiences of it having occurred fast. In other words, of the day having gone by quickly. And have them use the look back strategy. That's time number 3 that you just did. And look back at them and see them going fast. Then the next thing to do is to go and set up the number 1 experience, the planner that says when this happens in the future, it's going to be a breeze. Okay? Now, once you've done that, then what I want you to do is I want you to have them go back and think about the experience. Okay? Remember they built 3 experiences. They have to be full, complete memories. Have them go through and construct it. First thing, have them go through and build a memory of it going fast, and then make sure all the submodalities are right. That's why you did all this elicitation. Stick it in the timeline. Okay? Once it's in the timeline, have it be in the right place in the timeline, so they won't be doing this for the first time. You're going to start by building the past, going to the planning for the future, and then they'll actually have the experience. The test that you use at the end of this is literally you pull out your watch again and have them remember it and clock it and find out which of the two it is. That's why you do. So we get to use measuring devices now. Da-da-da-da. And find out to make sure that it goes fast. Okay, are we clear on this? Now, again, as in all changes like this, remember that speed is of the essence. This is the point where you don't want to dawdle. You've already got all the information down here. Tell the person what to do and run them through it quickly. Okay? And it always helps when you do timelines to have them point so you can draw a picture of it. Okay? All right, go ahead. Take no more than about 15 minutes apiece max. Yeah? Clarify. All right. The thing that was time number 1, okay, that's where you give yourself a little post-hypnotic suggestion. Okay, that's where you do your planning. Step number 4, you have them plan that every time in the future they do this, it's going to be a breeze. Because, of course, it has, because of the stuff that's in their timeline. All right? Anything else?
So everything is worth looking forward to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worth looking forward to, and you know it's going to be a breeze. You know it's going to go fast because you've already got a past that tells you that it's going to, and you've got post-hypnotic suggestions that are going to go forward. So when you think about it, everything inside you should go, yeah, of course it is. Of course it's going to be quick. Just the same way as when you think about now, when you stop right now and think about the thing that's fast, the thing you elicited is something that time just goes really quick. Okay? When you think about it, if you think about doing it in the future, everything inside you tells you it's going to be just like that. It's going to go zip. It's going to zip right by, right? Now, this is what we want to build for you. It's the same thing. Okay, there's another little piece we're going to do just to make sure it does. We're going to smash it into the ground. You know, my thing is overkill. I mean, I come at everything from 90 different directions. But we're going to do them a piece at a time. So go ahead and do this piece, 15 minutes a piece, and meet me back here. The next piece now is to go for the opposite side. There are some things that just go by too fast, and you'd like them to be longer so you could enjoy them more. Now, I don't know if anything comes up in your mind where this might be useful, but there are some things that just seem subjectively where it seems like, especially when they have to do with activities that have to do with coordinating the timing of individuals. Now,
What are you talking about? What do you mean, Richard?
well, something may come to mind. Now, as we thrust forward into this, the kinds of things that have to do with timing, that people have said to me lots and lots of times, they've said that one of the things that cannot be taught is timing. Now, I don't believe this because I believe everything people can learn about and learn how to vary it. One of the things is that as a musician you learn is that actual subjective experience of music about whether it moves fast or slow, that you could play the same record for people, and if you play different parts of it, actually, even though there's a metronome tempo, they will tell you that different parts of the song are moving faster because there are ways of manipulating sound such that you make more things happening in such a way that it sounds like that the music is actually changing. Now, if you take a meter, okay, and you think as a musician in 4, so you go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you go up to 12, you can break it and count in 3. You can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and end up in the same place. Now, that means that you can have two people thinking in different time signatures. Now, as a musician, if two musicians are playing at the same time, and one is thinking in 4, he's going to play 3 bars of music. If one is thinking in 3, they're going to play 4 bars of music. The person thinking in 3 will experience that it's going by a lot faster. Now, it creates very interesting things when you're playing music to change the time signature in your mind. It doesn't actually change the speed of the music, but it allows you to be able to do things a lot differently. For example, when you play in 3/4 time, it's not really any different than playing in 6/8 time. But the reason these things exist is that if you think in 6/8 time, you can play very fast stuff and it doesn't seem fast at all. So it allows you to actually control your neurology, your body better. It means that if you were thinking in 3/4 time, what you would have to do with your fingers would be hard. But when you think in 6/8 time, it's a piece of cake. So you say to yourself, no problem. Now, the next piece for us is to begin to take a look at when time goes slow and you really enjoy it. Now, if you can stop and think for yourself now, there have been times and places in your life, and where time just did not fly by, time cruised by. And it went by in such a way that it allowed you to really enjoy every single instance. Now, it may be that when you look at the clock, you may look at the clock and go, God, this is amazing. You mean only 15 minutes has gone by? Do you know what kind of things I'm talking about? Some things seem like they last a really long time. They're really enjoyable. But yet, when you look at the clock, you could have sworn more time had gone by. See, there's different kinds. This is another sampling of a kind of time that you enjoy. It's the opposite. It's where time moves the way it normally moves when it's excruciating, but it does it in a way that's pleasant. Now, what we want to be able to do here is to go and find out for yourselves by taking an example of each. First, we want an example of time slow but unpleasant. Okay? Then we want an example of time slow but pleasant. Now, once you find out with this, we're going to go through and we're going to pick up the submodalities. You should, by this point, have a hint about what kinds of submodalities they are from the elicitation you've been doing. Then what we're going to do is take something that you'd really like to enjoy more. See, for example, for somebody who's dieting, how about if they want to eat less and enjoy it more? Wouldn't that be nice? There's all kinds of things that you could do. Now, you want to be careful about what you select here, because you don't want to select something that you enjoy by virtue of it going by fast. That I know that a lot of times in seminars, people will say that, you know, they're in a seminar with me and the day goes by like that and it was really enjoyable. Now, if you were to stretch out that same day, for example, I know that the people who edit the videotapes have been explaining to me, you know, that each time they go through it, it's like suddenly, you know, it doesn't have the feeling that it had when it was there of excitement and going through. It's like, to them, it's like now if they have to watch it one more time, they feel like they're going to kill themselves. So by slowing the time down, you can actually make something boring. What you want is something that provides you the external stimulation on a constant basis where you can enjoy it. It will have to do with sensory input. Now, in order to make it so that the actual external time, the example we're using here is one where real time itself may not change, but your experience of it is going to change subjectively, so that it means that you get to enjoy every single instance of it. Does it make sense? So you want to find some past experience that's like that, and get the submodalities of it. You then want to compare that with the thing that you'd like to be more that way. Okay, now, if you just change the submodalities over, it would change it in your memory, but not necessarily in your future experience. So what you want to do now is to go back and stick it inside of the strategies that you've elicited. You now have a matrix of strategies about how to make things go fast and what makes them go slow, how to program them. Again, you want to take this matrix, you want to go back to the timeline, and the first thing you want to do is go through, and this time what you do is you take real past experiences of whatever the phenomenon is that went by too fast. It was so good, but it just went too quickly, right? That they didn't get a full chance to enjoy it so that they got the maximum amount of enjoyment out of the experience itself. Go back and literally take 3 memories this time and switch the submodalities in the memory in their place on the timeline. Then go to the point where you program for the future. Program for the future again, and then go back and test, again, clock time with the memories. Okay, 15 minutes apiece. Should go by faster this time, okay? Now, how'd you do? Okay, now, the trick is to stop now and now go back to a memory of one of the things, another example of a time and a place where you engage in the same activity, and find out whether when you go back into the memory, if you get the experience that you're after. Remember, when testing the future, a lot of us have the ability to test it against the past. That when we do techniques, one of the things we want to know is about the process of generalization. If you changed the submodalities in 3 past memories, right, you went through and programmed yourself for the future. When you think back now, when you think about other examples, this should begin to generalize. If you go and think of another example that doesn't generalize, then add another example. Just like when you do change history. If you do one change history with one event, and then you have them think of another event that's like it, and it doesn't generalize, you want to just do more, and then you see. See, you have to literally force people at the unconscious level to begin to do generalization. The other thing I wanted to point out is that during the course of this evening, what I would like you to do is to take and do one little homework experiment for me. The thing that I want you to do is while you eat dinner, I want you to try a little trick. I want you to go in and run through the combinations. Now, the list runs something like this. You know that there are times where it goes slow and you don't like it, times where it goes slow, you do like it. Okay, there are times where it goes fast and you don't like it, times where it goes fast and you do like it. Now, there are some other combinations, but I want you to just start with those. And you know enough about the submodalities. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take the post-hypnotic suggestion part of it, the time 1 thing, where you program yourself, look down at your food, program yourself that the amount of time that it's going to take for that fork to get to your mouth and to chew the food and swallow the food is going to take a really long time, and you're really going to enjoy it. It's not that you don't enjoy the food. You can make it so that it takes a long time to get to your mouth, and it's not that you don't enjoy the food, it's that you don't enjoy how long it takes. There are some things that you enjoy that just take too long. Okay, and it's how long it takes that you don't enjoy. I mean, for example, I enjoy certain things, but I don't enjoy how long they take to. For example, I enjoy going on vacation, but I do not enjoy how long it takes to get there. But what I want you to do is to experiment, because what I want you to do is to program yourself so that your external behavior becomes affected and influenced, so that you can notice that when you program yourself, whether it really seems to take forever, whether it seems to go real fast, and notice either with your eating or with some other activity, I'm primarily interested in not you moving your hands slow, but in your seeming like it just takes a long time. Okay, this is called external time distortion. This is what happened with the baseball pitcher. Threw the ball, and the batter stood up there and went, it felt like you need to go back to the dugout, get another bat, and come back over to the base, because it just needed something to kill time. Because the ball, when I did it initially, I made it so the ball moved too slow. And by the ball being too slow, the guy lost interest in it coming there. Didn't improve his batting average, but it did succeed at making the ball move slowly. We then had to speed it up till we found the perfect speed for that activity to produce the perfect performance. And I want to get to the adjustment of external behavior. There's some good uses for it. Now, this morning, one of the things that I want to do is there's one little piece that we didn't get to yesterday, which has to do with actually affecting your visual perception of speed. That your subjective sense of time is one thing, but your subjective sense of speed is another. Now, for those of you, especially for those of you that engage in activities like skiing, if you play any sports, all kinds of things where if the world slowed down, especially if any of you do any martial arts too, this is extremely useful for martial arts. It's real useful as far as I'm concerned, also for those of us that do NLP in terms of being able to perceive things behaviorally. That a lot of times people will say to me that they'll say, well, you seem to see a lot. Well, it doesn't seem that way to me. The thing is that for most people it all goes by so fast, but it doesn't go by so fast for me. that if you can literally slow it down, especially when you engage in things like strategy elicitation, the sequential strategies, not the simultaneous ones so much, but when you're engaged in activities, especially if you're trying to model something, where you want to get down to minimal muscle movements and eye accessing cues and stuff like that. If you can slow the world down, it makes it a lot easier. Now, the way you slow the world down, of course, has to do with speeding yourself up. Now, this is just a little piece that goes on top of what we did yesterday. So you will need to remember yesterday. I realize usually when people come in the morning, they try to, they come in and I'll give them an instruction and they'll carry it out. They kind of forget that everything builds on top of everything else. But I thought I'd remind each of both of you, since it looks like only half of most of you is here. Some of you went out and had fun last night, celebrated the New Year, huh? It's a Jewish New Year. For some of you looked confused. New Year? It's a Chinese New Year? It's like, talked to somebody on the phone last night, wished them a Happy New Year, and they went, is it Chinese New Year? I went, do I look Chinese? Now, the piece that I want to add here is that if you stop and think about driving down the freeway, okay, you're driving down the freeway, driving a cool 120. Zzz, you pull off onto a 45-mile-an-hour road, and you feel like you're crawling. Now, there's two things about this, which is that creates for you the kinesthetic sensation of going slow. And the cars that are next to you don't look like they're moving very fast, and the ones that are going by. Now, the thing is on the other hand, if you look to the side of the road and watch people walk, they don't really look like they're walking slow. The thing is to alter your perceptions. One of the things you need to do is to get, it's not enough to, like if you going to do an NLP elicitation, you don't need to drive to work at 120 and jump out. It doesn't seem to do it. The thing that you need to do is to take the very activity that you're going to do and to speed it up. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try a little experiment. I want you to go back with your partner, and the first thing I want you to do is, since you all brought your papers from yesterday with all your little lists and notes on it, which I always love, that's my way of checking on you. It's the old crystal ball gazing thing where did you guys ever do the crystal ball gazing? Okay. Well, crystal ball gazing is extremely useful for any of you who do training. As you go through and mention things, you can find out if you have to redo them again. That, when you go through and mention techniques and people look at you and go. Right. It's one thing if one of them goes, but when you get a whole room full of people that go, then there's two possibilities. One, either they forgot because you did the amnesia pattern afterwards. That's the toughest one to teach, by the way, is the amnesia patterns. When you start teaching amnesia patterns, I can never get through the instructions. So I came prepared today, though, so that we could deal with it. So just a little something to remind you that one of the things is when you do the amnesia pattern, when you get through the first two steps in the instructions, people go, could you go back over the first one again? And then I can look at them and go, what first one? Now, the thing is that what I want you to do is to go back, and again, what you're going to do is to reinduce the appropriate sense of time. But the important part here is sequence. That this time, what you're going to do is to pick an activity. Pick some small behavioral activity that they can perform inside this room. I mean, whether it's just getting up, walking across the room, or turning and watching somebody else move. Because what we're after here is literally making it so that the world doesn't move so fast. That, because, when you ask questions like, you do things, you're trying to do elicitation, and you ask somebody a question like, well, I want you to go back and think of the last decision you made, okay, and they'll remember it, and they'll go, now, I want you to go get inside that. What happened? And they go, real fast. You know how their eyes move real quick and stuff? Wouldn't it be nice if you had a way of just, in yourself, firing off an anchor that made it so that it was very slow, so that even when they moved, when they went, let's see. Now, this requires also, it's also kind of fun to listen to the world when you slow it down and the auditory changes. And the visual stuff just moves slower, but it stays the same. But the auditory stuff changes, like when a record slows down. Now, what you need to do is to first induce the state where your sense of time changes. Because what you're going to want to do in the second step is to be able to put yourself inside. So if you start with a construction for yourself, a visual construction, where you see yourself engaging in the activity, then what you do is you take that and you make it go faster and faster, and then step inside it. So if it was just the activity of like walking across the room or watching somebody else walk across the room, what you do is you get from the visual point of view of being inside the representation, and then speed it up faster and faster and faster. But remember, again, as you get in it, you want it to be comfortable. See, if you just speed up images, a lot of times, mostly all you'll accomplish is to agitate yourself. Again, you want to be able to have the first step, which is to adjust your subjectivity of it. So as you get the pictures faster, you want to go back inside the submodalities that had to do with your sense of time, with things going slow, so that you can have the sensation of it going slow when you're seeing it going fast. So again, see, you don't want to make it so that it occurs faster. You want to go the other way, so that your sense is that it's taking a long time. So you go back in, pull up the representation that something is taking a long time. Pleasantly. You remember that one? That one. We'll save that for later. Okay. And then once you have the sensation that it's taking a long time, then you want to be able to actually speed up what's going on, so that you create the dichotomy by taking the two different kinds of representations, one which is moving incredibly fast, but yet your subjectivity is that it's taking a long time. Now, you also want to make sure you do this from the inside. Okay? Then once you've done that, then I want you to do is to test it externally. And I want you to do it very quickly and keep cycling so that you can speed it up and speed it up. Now, each time you do it, I want you to create an anchor for yourself of some kind so that you can reinduce the state, because it's the kind of state that you want to get into quickly. Now, most of us have the experience of being in this state, but it only happens to us with a shock and a surprise. That, so we're driving down the road, suddenly, a dog jumps in front of the car, whack, the world goes into slow motion. Well, we don't want to have to throw, unwilling victims in front of our car to do this. But again, what you want to do is to create an anchor. And one of the ways to create the anchor is to create for yourself a visual anchor this time, a mental one, so that when you look up and you're actually getting the state where you feel that things are, for yourself, are that it's something is taking a long time and is pleasant. Okay, you've got your representations going very fast, you step inside them, and then you look out and you notice that people are moving slower, perhaps even talking slower. Use auditory when you do the internal stuff too, so that people are talking like Mickey Mouse internally. So that once you've built this up and you turn and you're getting the state, the kinesthetics will lead you back. If you notice, it will feel different. What I want you to do is to create for yourself just a little thing, and this is the way I do it because the surprise element is always nice, is that I've just created for myself a little dot over here. I made a red one, right? And it goes whoosh, and opens up like that as an anchor. And then in the picture I just have the word that goes fast, or slow or whatever. You can make whatever you want. You can have it come up, and be a red face and have it distort into a dragon if you want. Just so that when you make the representation, it'll take you back to the kinesthetics. Now, if you want, you can use a kinesthetic anchor, or if you have good enough, some of you have very good kinesthetic leads, you can just memorize the way it feels. Because what you want to do is to be able to take the feeling as your guide and have it lead you back into the state. It's almost like reinducing drug states with a kinesthetic lead. But what we're after here is to create an altered state, which I don't know of a drug that takes you to that state. They'll make one eventually, but till they do, we're going to create it artificially. Otherwise, we'd all take the drug and then recreate it. Wouldn't that be a fun class? It's time for sodium pentothal for everybody. Get one of those doctors. Boy, when I worked with the military guys, they have an interesting approach to testing pain. I tell you, we did a thing on pain control. They came in with all of these boxes of devices of inflicting pain. You know, they're going to be having some fun now, boy. You know, they like to take these big needles and stick them through their hands and stuff. It's a macho thing to do, to sit there. Of course, me, I always like to do the thing about removing the pain control suddenly, just so they know that it hurts. Wouldn't be macho otherwise. Okay, now, do you understand what I'm asking you to do?
How do you get out of that state?
How do you get out of it?
I mean, you don't want to stay in it forever, I
Yeah.
suppose.
You reverse it. Or
So
you
your
just,
red dot just
or you
comes
just say to, well, to me, I just go, stop it. It's one of the things, one of the things that we all learn very, very young. You'd be surprised, like, one of the things that happened is I did a seminar back in Pennsylvania recently, and I got a group of people that I don't think really understood the kind of stuff you could work on, because it's one of those things where I said, okay, I said, we're just going to take a day, you can ask for anything you want. I mean, just pick something that would really change your life. And I said, now, you know, somebody got something, this lady raised her hand, and I said, okay, what is it? She said, well, I'd like to be able to light a match. I thought, there's a life changer. Well, as it turned out, she didn't have necessarily a phobia of lighting a match. She'd never done it. But the thing is so I said, well, what happens when you think about, you know, lighting a match or a Bic lighter? And she said she gets scared. Now, there's a difference between a phobia and just being scared. She was scared enough that she never tried it. This is something I notice a lot in discos with guys that want to go ask somebody to dance. They never get up off their chair and walk across the room. You know. Now, you can't really say they have a phobia. What they have is that, you know, instead of putting themselves in a state that, you know, they go and get dressed up, but they don't dress up their attitude. This is the problem. What happens is that they end up slowly and sequentially building a fear to the point where they never get started. Now, the thing is that I went through and did something so she wasn't afraid, and I handed her the matches. And she said, because I had to actually show her how you close the book, hold the thing, you know, strike it. She actually had trouble. She pushed too hard, and you break the match when you do that. But one of the things is when she picked it up, her hands were shaking like crazy. And I asked her, I said, are you nervous or something? And she went, no. She said, my hands are just shaking. So I told her, I said, look at your hands and say, stop it. Because your hands are the first thing that learn to respond to words. You do it when you're a kid, when you go to reach for something, parents go, no, stop it. And you're, you know, and eventually they, with a little bit of appropriate training, you know, what happens is they teach you to make it so that when you reach for something, when they say stop, you do. So one of the things is that, so I told her to look at her hands and say stop it, and they just ground to a halt. She went, wow, they stopped, as if they weren't her hands. Now, the thing is I find that this works very good for me for almost everything. That, you know, if you take a little parental voice inside your head and just have it yell, stop it, you can stop just about anything. You know, and I have pictures looping around in my head driving me crazy, you know. Just go back, grab a parent voice, and go, stop it! And they go, like that. And I go to your room, and they go. Sounds silly, but whatever works, works. Now, so I mean, that's always my approach. I don't think you'll have that much trouble stopping it, because usually these are the kinds of things that wear off after a while. I mean, just like when you drive down the freeway real fast and get off. First, everything seems like it's going slow, but if you change what you're doing for a moment and come back, it gets fairly normal. It's thing about time and speed is it's relative. You can also, if you have trouble doing it, you can just turn it around the other way. Go in and make it reverse the procedure, and you can pull yourself out. Now, I want you to do one other thing just to kind of beef this up a little bit, okay? But you got this part. These instructions you got down. Yes? Okay. This is yes, this is no. Okay. That's all you have to remember here. When listening to me, then you have to remember the instructions when you get out there. The other thing, since the last time I was here, I did the thing about inducing altered states with submodalities, didn't I? Okay, the thing is that what I'd like you to do when you start is to start by inducing a trance in the other person. That I've found that when doing things with time, it's always helpful. It doesn't have to be a really deep trance, but it always helps. To just go ahead and take the time since you know enough about this already, just to induce an altered state. The other person will help you. Since they were here before, they probably know a lot about going into a trance. Okay, so just induce an altered state. It'll make it a little bit more fun. And enjoy yourselves. After all, time is relative. And if time is money, this could make you all rich. Go ahead. It should take you about 20 minutes apiece, max, to do this. And have fun with it, even though it's morning. So I want to pause for a minute and remind your little brains about when you do this stuff. You guys remember way back to the stuff about presuppositions? See, I noticed that some of you were using language patterns which had presuppositions that were the opposite of what you were trying to accomplish. Which, see, the thing is, especially when you do a trance, when you give people suggestions, they have a tendency to follow them. And so when you do things, even when you use tonal stuff, when you say things like, and it's gonna, then you're gonna see the world in slow motion. See, you guys remember that stuff about congruency? Right? I know it's tough to be congruent before noon, but I kind of floated around a little bit, and I have to remind you that the more you amplify your own behavior when you do these things with people, the better they're going to work. I mean, and also that for those of, like Charles told me, he said, well, I love this, it was only a little bit slower. Well, the thing is once you get it a little bit slower, you can, of course, always then increase it. It tells you that the internal representations need to go that much faster. But I cannot emphasize enough when you're doing these things that being congruent and paying attention and listening to your own language, because presuppositions are incredibly powerful. And it always, instead of trying to not do something, use them. But say, you know, when you say now, you haven't yet put the world in slow motion, presupposition, you're going to. That all of those, you always want to stack presuppositions in your language towards success.